Thanks, Emmy. My name is Jack Cook, and I'm the kind of client partner for mobility here at Neudesic, and thank you for joining today's presentation on enterprise mobility. A little bit about myself before we get started. So I am a client partner here at Neudesic, located in our Southern California region, really kind of focusing on bringing mobile, whether it's a strategy, application development, or just any other kind of mobile services to our customers. Additionally, nationally, I'm leading Neudesic's mobile initiatives around kind of taking Neudesic and a lot of our customers into the mobile arena. During my tenure at Neudesic, as well as previous to joining Neudesic, I developed a mobile strategy for a number of Fortune 500 companies. So I do have that experience and background of being able to take a lot of the principles that are being discussed in this webinar and applying them to the actual applications. In addition to my mobile focus, I have a large amount of focus kind of in the cloud offerings as well as web type development. You can see my contact information below, and it will be provided kind of at the conclusion of this webinar as well. A little bit about Neudesic. So Neudesic is a multinational technology services provider with 17 offices in the United States, with our headquarters being in Irvine, California, which is in Southern California. Additionally, Neudesic has 2 global offices located in India, with about 500 consultants nationally to focus on a number of different initiatives. Neudesic offers a wide variety of technology services, including expertise in BI, CRM, connected systems, custom application development, and of course mobility. As we kind of focus on some of Neudesic's mobile capabilities, we really kind of can help an organization really at any step of their mobile or enterprise mobile strategy. Anyway, from creating that strategy, so sitting down with their customers, going over topics which we'll be going over today, and really kind of fleshing out what they're looking for from a mobile initiative, to the development of an actual mobile application, whether it's leveraging technologies like ASP.NET MVC to create a kind of a responsive mobile web type experience, leveraging cross-platform tools like Xamarin to provide kind of a native experience while writing a kind of a single code base, or just writing the native applications, leveraging Objective-C or Java to create an iOS or an Android application respectively. Testing, Neudesic's done a large amount of work in our mobile testing capabilities, so leveraging both our on and our offshore as well as our Amerishore resources to test the actual applications on physical devices, kind of the functional type testing, all the way to automated testing, where we can really stress the Android fragmentation market, as well as now what iOS is starting to become fragmented as well, and making sure that the application works on all of the devices that your enterprise may be targeting, not just a few set that the developers happen to have in their pocket. And then finally, from a support kind of services, of being able to deploy the applications to the various stores, whether it be Apple's App Store or Google's Play or Amazon's App Store, taking it through that process, as well as the actual support of the application. So once it goes live, managing it, supporting it from a kind of a bug fixing capability, as well as providing kind of end user support if needed. So jumping into the agenda for this webinar, as I kind of meet with a number of different customers, a lot of main topics come up when we're talking about strategy. One is kind of around the infrastructure. So I have a lot of devices, I know I have some services, what do I need to be kind of planning and thinking about? From an apps perspective, there's obviously the development aspect of it, but there's a planning aspect that goes into those applications as well. So how are you really going to get your users productive, and how are you going to be planning for a lot of the mobile development activities that will be coming along? And then finally, and the biggest piece of kind of any enterprise mobility initiative is around security. So what are we going to protect? How are we going to protect it? When does that kind of protection need to take place? And then finally, around, we'll have some time at the very end to answer any questions that you may have. Gartner has coined kind of a new term around the digital business, and they defined it as the digital business is the creation of a new business designs by blurring the digital and the physical worlds. Traditionally, customers visited either your physical storefront, where they maybe purchased an item from somebody, they gathered information from somebody, That eventually evolved to a web presence, but the customer was still coming to you. With this new digital business, and at least the way I see it, is customers are now on the move, and we need to be able to go to them or provide services or capabilities for them to come to us no matter where they're at. This is even if you have a kind of a static customer or kind of a known customer, so if we're talking about enterprise mobility, they're going to want to come to you, but you should be able to provide those services to make it easier for them and flexible for them to interact with you. I see mobility and really enterprise mobility as being a tier or a pillar of this digital business, really forcing CIOs, CTOs, even the concept of a new chief digital officer or CDO to really embrace mobile within an organization and get their handle on it. It's going to be there, and so having that strategy or that roadmap in place for them can really kind of help empower a lot of their end users or their customers moving forward. A little bit about kind of the number of devices out there. Now this was actually published by Cisco in 2011, so it might be a little bit old, but in around kind of 2008 or 2009, we passed the number of devices to people. So at that point, there was more devices connected to the internet around 2008 or 2009 than there were people in the world. And as you can see, by 2020, there will be almost 6.5 or almost 7 devices per person in the world connected to the internet. So what does that mean? There's going to be a lot of devices out there, and kind of managing it from an enterprise perspective or even a consumerization perspective, mobile's here and we can't really kind of brush it under the covers. Just a quick little story about a conference I was at. I was recently at Xamarin's Evolve conference and talking to one of their IT managers, and while they had about 1,000 users or 1,000 attendees, they had almost 4,000 devices connected to the network at one time. That's almost a 1-to-4 ratio of devices. Organizations are also going to have to be able to handle a lot of this influx of devices. Kind of gone are the days of there was a single user connected to a single computer. That user now has a computer, they have a phone, they have a tablet, they may have multiple phones. So really there is an exponential growth of the number of devices that are going to be connected to the network or connected to a service, and that planning needs to take place. And again, kind of as I've mentioned it before, mobile's here, it needs to be embraced, and there's a number of kind of facets around enterprise mobility that Neudesic can really kind of assist your organization with. There's one around the technology, which is really going to be the focus of today's webinar, but there's the concept of governance. So how are you going to be managing a lot of these devices and the applications and the security moving forward? Is there going to be a group around it or not? There's the support of this, so having the support not just from a help desk type support, but the support of an entire organization or decision maker matrix, so that the decisions can be made quickly and easily. And then finally around security and really continuing to audit around that. And that's another topic for this webinar that I'll be covering lightly. So kind of jumping into the infrastructure. It takes a lot of investment and hours to build out a full infrastructure for kind of a mobile initiative. There may be kind of the enterprise type connectors, so if you're connecting to an ERP system, even like a mail server, CRM type system, there's going to be that level of kind of actual physical hardware that may be created from it. There's the infrastructure of just the mobile piece, so standing up the different services, different gateways, potentially creating servers in a DMZ. There's then the support of the actual devices, so you may have an MDM type solution out there. There may be different SDKs or the ability to support offline capabilities, and so a secondary set of services before you even get to the actual device or the actual application sitting on that device. All of this doesn't have to be done at one time. It can actually be done in a kind of a number of stages, or as applications needed, it can be built out. But it is important for an enterprise or an organization to really kind of understand there is a lot of kind of investment that needs to take place, and so a large amount of planning needs to be done up front to make sure that the organization is successful. Kind of jumping just kind of into mobile device management a little bit. I know it's one of the topics as we kind of polled our customers of what are you looking for when you're dealing with an enterprise strategy. And kind of from a user point of view and kind of also from a management point of view, there's a number of features of any type of MDM solution that an organization should really be looking at and kind of balanced based on what their priorities are. So from a monitoring capability, kind of being able to monitor the devices, where they're at, what they're doing, kind of what kind of applications are sitting on top of it. Device support is very important. With Android having a very fragmented market, are you going to be supporting all of the Android devices, a certain subset, a certain OS sitting on that device? App management, are you going to be allowing users to install Angry Birds on the phones as well, or is it just going to be more of a corporate type device and really locking it down to corporate type applications? And then security being the biggest. There's also a number of different concepts around kind of mobile device management or philosophies around it. So people are very familiar with the concept of BYOD, or bring your own device, which is an organization will stand up an infrastructure, they'll provide a number of applications for the user to download and interact with, but the users are bringing their own devices. This eliminates the need to have a personal device as well as a work device, and there's a lot of pros and cons that can be discussed around that, so specifically around productivity. If the users always have their work phones, theoretically they can be working. All the way to a corporate provided kind of initiative where the devices are procured by a corporation or an organization. They are distributed kind of based on potentially level, or everybody maybe gets an iPhone, but the number of devices are there. When you look at this from a user's point of view, it really becomes a matrix of, you know, are they really monitoring, if it's a BYOD environment, are they monitoring my device? Are they watching me? Is it kind of a big brother type scenario? All the way to a corporate kind of corporate provided device where you have to carry around a second phone because people really want that Snapchat kind of capabilities. If we then, and kind of the number of providers out there from a mobile device management capability is growing quite a bit. Now this is Gartner's Magic Quadrant around MDM service providers or kind of platforms, and you can see there's a lot of leaders, and that space, or that kind of that top right quadrant is really starting to fill up with some really strong contenders that provide a lot of the capabilities we just talked around monitoring, device support, app management, security, but also allow you to configure it how you want to for your organization and not force you into a certain set of features and functionality, but allow you to configure it what you're looking for. This was kind of the user's point of view around MDM from a, you know, are they monitoring me all the way to I have to have a number of my own kind of devices? But there's also the management's point of view of MDM, and really kind of, if you start with a BYOD initiative, there's a lower initial cost for the organization because users are bringing in their own devices. You don't have to go out and procure a bunch of them, provision them, and then deploy them to the organization. Users are bringing in the devices they're comfortable with. You don't need to train them on it. There's a lower cost of that kind of entry. But as you look at it from a longer term or a longer run perspective, it does become more expensive and more challenging, and an organization needs to kind of keep in mind on that. So as you start down the mobile app development path, now you're going to be targeting or having to support multiple applications, potentially provisioning users so that some get applications if they have a certain device, others don't, and then you're starting to get into a blended model. So having a lot of that planning and upfront thought process around which way does the organization want to go, and then knowing in the future where they want to be, and then kind of selecting the kind of the MDM kind of principle is important. Kind of the other facet that I want to talk about right now around the infrastructure perspective is around services. Now, to have a successful application, mobile application, there needs to be some kind of data coming into the phone or into the tablet. Traditionally, there would be cloud-based services that are kind of created by the enterprise or created by the organization, or maybe they're even hosted on-prem in the organization's own data center. Now, there can be custom services, so the development of REST-based services is very common in a kind of a mobile application scenario. And having those kind of out there and deployed, maybe it's for an expense system that you want to be able to have, and so how you're going to interact with that expense system, and having those services out there. Additionally, there's a lot of kind of large enterprise type applications or third-party applications that are providing just specific services for mobile devices and for connectivity to those mobile devices, where for example, like Oracle or SAP, they expose a lot of services that an organization can then consume as they're building out a mobile application and have all of the services and all those ties to that application already done for them. In addition to kind of these regular kind of traditional type services where you're bringing data back and forth, there's been a huge expanse in mobile specific services. What I mean by that is really kind of a set of services provided by a number of different companies. Microsoft has their Azure mobile service kind of suite where they provide a lot of kind of out-of-the-box services that are either free initially based on the load that you're putting against that service, or for kind of a nominal cost, but really accelerates a lot of that mobile development, so users don't have to, or developers don't have to go create the wheel or recreate the wheel on numerous occasions. So to highlight a couple of those, there's the kind of the key value pair service where you provide a key and a value, and then you can go retrieve that value really quickly. Works great for users that, or for applications where there may be settings or small amounts of data that needs to be stored. There's offline data storage services, so services that kind of create or host blob type storage so that you can quickly just dump the kind of the cache of the application up there, and it can sync back and forth to provide a lot of that offline capability. And then push notifications. Users are always going to be in front of your application or interacting with your application, but they may need some kind of notification. And so there's push-based services to help kind of interact with it. Like I said, there's a lot of ways to look at kind of an infrastructure service and really kind of planning out which ones are we going to be leveraging out of the box, which ones we're going to be custom building, and then what can we leverage that's out there already in the ecosystem that are available. Moving over to the development side, a number of organizations eventually get to a concept called a mobile center of excellence. And now this could be composed of a director of mobile application development being the head of it, and that's his entire role in an organization, or it may be made up of team members that have multiple roles. Maybe that director owns all of development within the organization. He's just sitting as a figurehead on it. The really important aspect of a mobile center of excellence, or really the goal around it, is to maximize the reach of the mobile investment that the enterprise is making. They're going out and they're creating a lot of services, they're hosting a lot of infrastructure around it, they're buying a bunch of devices. How do you get the most value out of that, and how do you have a centralized organization within an enterprise really kind of drive a lot of those initiatives? There's a lot of key kind of components that come into or come out of a mobile center of excellence, and with the biggest really being the mobile direction, mobile technology direction. So as you look at what technologies do we want to support? Do we want to support just email? Do we want to move into the mobile app development landscape? How are we going to be doing testing? If you have a centralized group within an organization that drives a lot of this direction, they can really get to a point where they reach as many users as possible with the least amount of kind of technology differences. This could be done with, say, a cross-platform development tool like Xamarin, where you write the code once, but it's distributed to both all of your Android type devices as well as your iOS type devices, and kind of standardizing maybe on Xamarin as a cross-platform tool. It may be the kind of the converse of that, of you just want to work with mobile web. We have a lot of expertise there, but you don't start to get a lot of that fragmentation within your development platforms. Additionally, the mobile kind of that app portfolio, so what applications are an organization going to be building? Should the organization start to go down that app development process, what types of apps are needed, going out, interacting with the business or those end users and saying, what are you really looking for? Maybe they don't need a corporate directory, but they are really in need of a mobile version of an expense management type system where they can easily go in and submit expenses or approve those types of expenses, and really knowing what the organization wants from an end user perspective can pay a lot of dividends. It's not we're going to build something and hope they come to it. They're already asking for it, and so it's really kind of fulfilling a need that's out there. There's the mobile software development lifecycle. I'll be talking to that in a minute. And then, again, really driving a lot of the security concerns for that organization, knowing what the CIO's top concerns are, or maybe what the security officer's top concerns are, and making sure those are part of the overall development process so that you don't get an application that's developed and then taken away just because it's a violation of your organization's security policy. As we start to move further and further into that kind of that app or the mobile app development kind of process, as you're starting to do a design, really the goal of an application or a mobile application is around making users more productive. Each of these this productivity can be looked at kind of really with three principles, at least the way I like to distill it down. One's a focus. Deliver on what the users need or what they want, and not just try and bake everything into one large application. We see a lot of customers have 100 different features in a single mobile application, and really working with them to focus it down of, do you really need, maybe the website has 100 features, but the mobile application only needs 5 or 10 of those core features, and really getting that focus of that application down to what it needs to be. It helps with information architecture, the navigation of the application, as well as the actual the design of the application and the development aspect of the application. Flexibility is another thing to look at. Users, the whole concept of mobile is you now have a transient workforce that's moving around. And if you have that flexibility built into it, so offline data storage may be a huge concern because the network connectivity isn't a constant like it would be for a web application. And really focusing on how do I make this the most flexible application to drive a lot of usage. And then finally, being connected. And I think this is a big part of any kind of mobile initiative is really connecting users. Back when the computer kind of revolution started, we started building out kind of smart things. We built out systems that were smart and they did certain things. The internet came along, we tied a lot of those systems together so they were able to share information or share smarts between each other. And now with mobile, we still want to keep a lot of those systems tied together, but they just want to do it while it's all in motion. And so being able to be connected to that enterprise is a kind of a huge focus or a huge kind of design principle as you're going through a lot of your mobile application development. Getting into that mobile development, the actual development or that software development lifecycle, Neudesic takes an approach, and a lot of companies take their approach when designing really any system, is to have a mobile first type development. So what does that mean? It means kind of focusing on, as you're building out the application, let's assume it's going to go to a mobile model where that you are going to have the mobile, some kind of mobile interface, whether it's a responsive UI, an actual native device, but be planning for that. And that kind of tends itself or leads itself really well through the rest of the software development lifecycle. Starting with the intake process, so what are the business requirements? As I mentioned as a component of the Mobile Center of Excellence is talking to the business. What are they really looking for? Determining kind of what the nice-to-haves are versus the actual hard requirements that need to be developed. As you start to kind of get that approval for the application, you jump into that design phase. That's when you kind of start to make the platform selection type decisions. Is this going to be mobile web? Is this going to be a native application? And really kind of understanding what the requirements are. It needs offline storage and access to a GPS. It's probably going to be a native application versus you just need to serve up some information. Mobile web may make more sense. And then making it usable. User experience is a huge part of mobile development, making sure that it's an intuitive, training's not needed, it looks great, and really kind of focusing on what the customer is looking for. Even though, like I mentioned before, you have captive users, they're not going to be, they have to use your app, there's not going to be other versions of it that they can download from the store. It's still important to make it a nice, easy experience for them that looks nice. It'll help drive adoption and we'll continue to have them using that application. Once you get into the development aspect, one thing that organizations like to do is, especially if you're in a BYOD type environment, is you're going to have to target a lot of different platforms. So how can you do that the kind of the easiest way? Can you build it one time and deploy it to iOS and Android and Windows Phone, or do you have to have separate code bases for each? That leads itself into kind of a source control type conversation, deployment conversations, and so as part of that design and as part of that development process, you want to get down to how do you get to as many users as possible on a single set of code. Additionally, the kind of from an agile development methodology or kind of a small iterative type development, small cycles are very important in mobile development. You can be out there and working through getting an initial release out maybe in a month or 2 months, have the users looking at it, make sure you have analytics built into the mobile application so you can see where it's crashing, what features users are using, what features they're not using, and then go back and have another smarter release later on around kind of some of that feedback that you got from that development process. Testing, I mentioned a little bit before. There's the concept of the functional testing, which having users actually holding physical devices and testing that out. But there's also kind of automated testing, which can lead to then performance testing of an application. So writing those test scripts to test the kind of across multiple devices or that fragmentation of devices. So there's a couple of hundred or a couple of thousand different variations of the Android platform. We're now with iPhone 6 and the 5 and even the 4S, we now have different iOS platforms that need to be targeted, and figuring out how you can automate that really quickly. If you have a BYOD environment, there's a lot of different variations, and so how can you get that testing in place? And then finally, that can lead to performance type testing, where you are testing both the actual device itself and making sure that it's a good user experience, using things like instruments to figure out if you have memory leaks or not, but then also testing the back-end services and making sure they're able to support that proliferation of all of the devices that I talked about kind of at the beginning of the webinar, where it's not a single user and a single device anymore, it's a single user across multiple devices. And then finally, when you get into that deployment scenario, are you going to be deploying your application locally? So you have some kind of enterprise store that's deploying those applications, or is it going to be more of a kind of a traditional pushing an application through the app store and going through that approval process, and really kind of planning all of that out, knowing that there can be delays in that. So making sure that you get your apps approved and in the stores even before a go-live date to make sure that you're ready to go and you're not having a problem like iOS 8 has introduced recently and causing delays in the Apple's approval process. And then finally, jumping to security. Security of a mobile application can really be looked at a kind of a number of different layers. If you want to look at it almost as a cake. You can start all the way at the device and then all the way down to the actual data on the device. And there's a number of different capabilities that your organization, really based on your policy, should look at. And really kind of the key as you go through your security policies, and I'll be talking to that in a little bit, is making sure that it's really kind of preventing any kind of data breaches. So you want to make sure you're securing that data all the way through the process. So starting up at the device, do you have an MDM solution in place that's monitoring these devices that can wipe a device should it get lost? Are you enforcing passcodes or actual even stronger security, even biometric security, before you even have access to that application? And then tracking the actual devices. Are they in an area where this application should work? You can even have a concept of almost a GPS fencing. So the application, maybe it's a monitoring application of hardware. If you're not anywhere near that hardware, why would that application even work? And so kind of there's different ways to look at from the security on the actual device. The application itself should have some kind of authentication. Does it have to invoke a VPN to get to certain types of application or to certain sets of data? And then that distribution of that application. Distribute it to the users that need it. Don't distribute it to the entire organization and then rely on the authentication portion of it. Don't even give some users access to maybe a dashboarding application that has company financials. Some kind of members of the development team probably don't need access to that information, but executives and the finance department does. And so really kind of focus on that distribution model. From a network or kind of those service-based security, really look at encryption. Encryption, there's a lot of out-of-the-box encryption methods, so you're encrypting data over the wire. You can encrypt the data while it's at rest, and then leveraging tokens so that you're not re-encrypting, or I'm sorry, you're not authenticating the service every time you make a call, but have some kind of timed out token. So when you make a security call initially, if you don't have that token, you authenticate the user, it comes back with the token and the data you're looking for. The next time you make that call, you can just leverage that token to go get some of that data. And then finally, the actual data. Is it even going to be stored on the device? Or is it always just going to be retrieved as part of some kind of service call? And knowing kind of where you're storing that data can be very important to an organization of whether they even allow that type of application to have certain sets of data. That was kind of looking at the security from an in-depth kind of perspective, so around the application and where it is kind of securing the different facets of it. But before you even get to that, you really need to look at a mobile, kind of the security policy of the organization. So does this policy make sense for all of the users in my organization that's going to have a mobile device? Now, we're not just talking about application security here, but if I'm giving a user a phone and saying, okay, here's your company phone, what are the expectations of that user of leveraging that device? And also that your mobile policy should go hand in hand with just any other acceptable use policy that you have in place in the organization. If you prevent the use of Facebook on your kind of corporate phones, or I'm sorry, on your corporate computers, so the desktop computers, maybe you also don't allow it on the mobile devices, or you know, it is allowed on a mobile device because maybe it's a personal device and you want to be able to provide that. But make sure that it is hand in hand with any kind of already in place acceptable use policy that the organization has. And then finally, and one thing that we run into a lot with especially multinational organizations is, does that policy that you're putting in place violate any local, national, or even international laws? Some organizations that have, say, offices in Europe, they can't track where the device is at or kind of track what the users are doing on these devices. It's just against the law there. And so as you're designing the security policy, know kind of what those local laws are and then how it affects your distributed user base. The security policy, once you kind of figured out what you think it's going to be during that development phase, you need to publish out that policy. Now, as you can see, this is a very cyclical type process or understanding. So once you do get that published, getting some kind of signature, whether it's a digital signature, physical signature, or just an acceptance as they enroll in some kind of MDM solution is really important because it's kind of reinforcing that this is a mobile device that's under a corporate use policy and making sure that the users are there. You do need to enforce that policy once it's in place, so whether you're leveraging MDM to do it or other types of logging to do it, and then proactively wiping devices. If a user comes in and says, I may have lost my phone, oh, by the way, I'm a finance person and I had some of the financial data of the company, wipe the device. Don't take a chance at hoping that that device will be found. With a lot of the backup capabilities of a lot of the different platforms, you can re-image that device pretty quickly without a huge concern of loss. And then auditing that process is very important, or that security policy is important, because every 6 months, every year, that policy is going to be changing, and making sure that you're keeping it up to date is very important, both from a corporate use policy, so making sure that as things change within the corporation, you're keeping that updated, but also from a user use policy, and so that as users are using the applications and the actual mobile devices, they're understanding what the policy is in place. In summary, kind of as I mentioned before, this was just a quick look at some of the components that go into a mobile strategy. We looked at the kind of information, or the infrastructure that could be required for a mobile initiative or an enterprise mobile initiative. Not all of the components are required that we kind of walked through, but they should at least be thought out and planned as the organization starts to mature their mobile initiatives. We quickly looked at the kind of high level from an application, really the planning stages of an application. So what applications is the business looking for, how we're going to be doing that development, and then kind of talking at a really high level of what are some of those concerns once you get to a testing aspect or the actual deployment aspect. And then we really brushed across the top of security, knowing that this is a very in-depth piece that an organization needs to talk to. There's a lot of decisions to be made. We kind of asked a lot more questions during this webinar than gave this is how things need to be done. But as I kind of kicked off the webinar, you need to talk through it. The organization needs to have those decision makers in place that are able to make a lot of these decisions and then stick with those decisions so that you can have a successful enterprise kind of mobile initiative going forward. And then finally, there's not one strategy that makes sense. You can't go out and say, I'm going to go buy a book on mobile strategy and this is going to be my answer for my organization. Every organization is different. So it's relying on a partner or even developing that capability internally, knowing there's a lot of kind of questions that need to be answered, and really kind of focusing on figuring out what that strategy is for your organization and not trying to stuff an organization or stuff a strategy into a specific organization. For more information kind of on some of Neudesic's capability as well as some use cases that we've done in the mobile kind of both strategy as well as development, you can visit neudesic.com/services/enterprise mobility services. There's going to be a lot of updates coming in the next couple of months. We have a lot of great mobile stories coming for some of our customers, so kind of check back often, and I think I'll now turn it over to any questions that anyone may have.
Great, thank you, Chad. We don't have any questions as of yet. As a reminder, if you do have a question, go ahead and type it in your control panel on the right. We still do have a couple minutes, so we'll hang tight and see if you guys have any questions.